This is a video of the CCA CKX, otherwise known as the CCA CKX. Now this is a 7 driver per side earphone, and we're going to find out if it's any good. Let's go. What's cracking, audio fans? It's David here from Prime Audio Reviews. So here is the box for the CKX. Yes, it actually comes in a box. Who would have thunk? Yeah, so it's basically just exactly the same as a KZ or like a TRN box. Nothing to write home about. But yeah, it does its job. And here are the earphones, the CKX. And unlike previous CCA earphones, these ones are actually metal. They're made out of a zinc alloy material, and I must say they are quite pretty indeed. They look quite a lot like the what is it now, the NF Audio NM2 Plus, quite similar to those. They're really small though. These are tiny compared to the BD005 Pros here. Check them out, even smaller than those. So if you've got small ears, these are 1 point up already. So let's have a quick look at the shells before we go any further. You got CCA on the faceplate. They come with the Type C 2-pin connectors with the little shroud there. A metal grill on the nozzle, of course. 2 little vents on the inner side of the shells. And that's about all there is to say. They've got a really lovely, smooth finish. And the build quality is fantastic. I can't complain about that at all. Looks great. Now when it comes to comfort, yeah, of course they work pretty well. I mean, look how small they are. You hardly even notice they're in your ears at all. So for build, aesthetics and comfort, top marks. Wonderful job. All right, let's get down to the price now. These come in at entry-level price of $69 US, which is pretty reasonable, and especially considering you're getting 7 drivers per side. Now what are those drivers? You get 1 dynamic driver and 6 balanced armature drivers, so 1 DD plus 6 BA, all in this tiny little shell, which is pretty amazing really. But I know why you're here. You want to know how they sound, so let's talk about how they sound. So basically these have got what I would call a classic CCA presentation. They are very smooth with slightly elevated bass and a nice relaxed treble. So let's break it down, starting with the bass. And the bass is pretty powerful. It is fairly linear from the sub bass to the mid bass. So that means, you know, the sub really low bass and the regular bass are on a similar level. So it is an authoritative bass. It has a nice amount of weight in it. These can really get a nice good growl, good deep rumble going on in your ears if you're into that kind of thing. And the mid bass is pretty punchy too. But the thing about the mid bass is the attack on it is a little bit blunted. So the leading edge of bass notes is a little blunted. So instead of getting a sort of a clean thwacky bass, it's more like a thumpy, bumpy, heavy, punchy bass, if you know what I mean. But it is a well-controlled one. It doesn't get out of control. It's not boomy or loose, but it is quite thick, and bass notes are quite rounded. So if you're into that, yeah. But anyway, let's go on to the mid-range now. And of course, the mid-range is slightly recessed. You've got a classic light V-shaped signature here with the CKX, but there's nothing really wrong with the mids. They don't sound distant, they don't sound thin. The mid-range itself is tuned in a fairly neutral way, but it does get a lot of warmth carrying over from the bass and the upper bass. It's not a real thick mid-range. It is a little bit dark, but that's mainly due to the way the treble is tuned, which I'll get to in a minute. But yeah, male vocals kind of blend in a bit to the upper bass, so there isn't a lot of real good definition there. It is a rich sort of powerful male vocal earphone, but not the most articulate and not the most detailed or textured. Female vocals get a little bit extra lift because there is a little bit of a upper mid-range boost on here, which gives things a little bit of liveliness, but it's still overall, it's a very smooth mid-range, just like every other part of the spectrum. That CCA buttery smooth. Oh baby. So let's go on now to the treble, and the treble is pretty relaxed on these. It doesn't have much sparkle, it doesn't have a lot of energy. The lower treble is fairly subdued, but having said that, the mid-range still has good resolution, fairly good instrument separation, but there's not a lot of micro details in there. So yeah, the lower treble is very smooth, it's very inoffensive. If you would consider yourself to be treble sensitive or sensitive to higher frequencies, you should be just fine with these, because they are, like I said, silky, chocolatey smooth up top. Now, the uppermost part of the treble does actually have a bit of a lift to it, so there is some airiness going on. It's not a really dense or dull treble. It does have a nice light airiness up top. It just doesn't have that much energy, and it's not a really forward treble. It's not all that precise, but it is kind of soft and it's a little bit warm. It's very relaxed. It's very cruisy. You can kind of listen to these all day and you won't get treble fatigue. And finally, the Soundstage. The Soundstage is actually not bad. It's reasonably intimate in terms of dimensions. It's kind of small. It's not a big Soundstage. Doesn't have big space out to the left and right or in front, but it's a nice rounded Soundstage. But yeah, fairly small in terms of scale, but also at the same time it's fairly organized, and that's thanks to the instrument separation and the resolution, which I mentioned earlier before. It doesn't sound all cluttered and messy inside. It still sounds nice, a little bit warmer on the warmer side and neutral, a little bit towards the darker side of the force, if you know what I mean. But overall, this is a good earphone. Quickly now, we'll do a couple of comparisons. First of all, I've got the CKX, or the CCA CKX, right? And the CA16 here actually has 8 drivers per side compared to the 7 on the CKX. But you can see the size difference in the shells here. Also, the CA16 is an acrylic or plastic shell, whereas the CKX is metal, of course. Now, in terms of comfort, I actually find these really good. These are also comfortable. They don't fit quite as snugly in my ears as these, but I must say the CKX here has really good noise isolation. If you got good ear tips and you get a good seal, got a bit of music going, you won't hear much of what's going outside at all. So yeah, good noise isolation. But back to this comparison, the CA16 has a little bit less sub bass. It's still got that mid bass hump, but it's got less sub bass. It has slightly more recessed mid-range, which actually in turn makes the treble sound a little bit more forward. And in addition, CA16 has got a little bit more lower treble energy, so it gets a bit more definition, a bit more lively sort of spark going on, but not as much upper treble as the CKX, but it kind of balances out because it doesn't have as much bass to contend with. It doesn't have as forward or as warm a mid-range to contend with. So the treble, although it doesn't have the same kind of upper treble extension that this one, the CKX, does, it still sounds nice and light and airy. And I believe these are the same price. They're both $69, I think. Correct me in the comments below if I'm wrong about that, but I think they're both $69. And yeah, the only thing I don't like about the CA16 is the skinny little nozzle here. It's a bit thin, which is why I got these kind of donkey tips going on, because my regular ones, like these ones, have got a 5mm core or 4.4 something, regular standard anyway. But you put them on here, that they just spin freely and they come off very easily because of these narrow nozzles. One thing I don't like, but apart from that, great earphones. And for our next comparison, we've got the Kinera BD005 Pro. Now this one is only a dual driver unit. It's got one dynamic driver and one balanced armature driver, but it's also about $20 cheaper, $49 versus $69. And for a lot of people, you know, a lot of people will probably like the appearance of the Kinera more. It's quite sexy, whereas this one's very utilitarian, very low key. I love them both. But anyway, let's get on to the important part, how they sound, how they compare sound wise. And actually they've got a very similar sound signature, these two earphones. They're both very cruisy, both have a kind of a thicker, impactful bass and warm mid-range and relaxed treble. So yeah, both come across pretty similar in the sound. I think the Kinera might have a little extra treble energy, which sort of makes its signature or presentation just a touch brighter, which some people will love. But yeah, there's very little separating these in terms of sound, so that makes the Kinera very appealing from a price standpoint alone. But it's up to you whether you like metal or acrylic shells. Anyway, to quickly sum up what I like about the CCA CKX, I love the shells, I love the size, the tiny size. The build quality is really nice, they're comfortable. I like the laid back and smooth sound signature that they have. Personally, I do wish they had a little bit more liveliness in the treble, a little bit more sort of clarity in the mid-range. But you can't really complain for 69 bucks. And if you are someone who is generally sensitive to treble and high frequencies, you should definitely check these out because they are pretty darn good. All right, guys, that's about it for this video. If you got any value from this, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel and want to see more reviews like this in the future, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And until next time, I'll see you later.